Hi everyone, we're back with the kitty head and we're going to assemble the pieces. I have them laid out on my ironing board here, and on page 26 the assembly instructions for the kitty head are on the left hand side of page 26. I've laid out my pieces in the orientation that is here. I have completed one section, and look at that. Isn't that amazing? And I'm going to show you how to piece everything together and the areas that are most important. One thing you will notice is that these two little edges right here, they do not match up quite perfectly, but that's okay because we have a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and that is going to hide that section right there. Okay, let's get started with the assembly instructions. So the first thing she's telling us to do is for the kitty head middle, which is SS and TT, we're going to attach SS to TT. So here's our SS. Here's our TT. I remove the paper off of my pieces. If you are doing it with the stitch through method on the paper, you will have your pieces stitched to your fabrics. Now what she's saying is just to attach this to this. So all we're going to do is take TT and SS, and I have wrong side facing up, so I'm going to put those two pieces together, matching the edges, and I'm just going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch away from there. If you've left the papers in, you're going to be stitching through the papers. Okay, so I'm just going to lay it out flat and line up my cut edges and my side edges and just stitch with a 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm going to stitch with the pink side up because the back side has got no seams in it, and if I stitch through this side, I can keep an eye on all my seams so they don't get flipped. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. I'll just put a couple of wonder clips in, or you can pin it. It doesn't matter, whichever you find easier. My cut edges are all nice and lined up, and now we'll go over to the sewing machine. I have right here is I have my 1/4 inch foot with the little edge guide on it, and I'm going to put that onto my machine, and I'm going to use that to stitch my seams together. I have changed my stitch length to a 2.0, and again I'm using my FAF Creative 4.5. So I'm just going to remove the wonder clip, and I'm going to start stitching right at the edge, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. And I've stitched right off the end. And I'm going to trim my trim my threads. And now we're going to take this to the iron and we're going to press those seams. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm at the ironing board right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and flip this and press my seams in that direction. I'm going to be pressing the pink towards the black section. This seam is going down. This seam I'm going to press up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my seam, and I'm using my larger iron this time. I will be switching in between the two irons. This one just has a bit of steam with it. So now I'm going to take my water brush again and just run the water brush along that seam. The fabric naturally wants to go that way, so that's the way I'm going to press it. I'm going to finger press it first. And now I'm just going to take my little iron and just press those seams. On page 27, you will find the assembly instructions for the kitty head left, which is YY to ZZ, and then those two to the WW. Remember, this is in reverse. So I've got my ZZ piece here, and my YY. I've taken the papers off. I'm going to place these right sides together, and if you notice, they're not going to line up exactly right here, but these two white seam allowances here should line up. So I'm going to place them right sides together, matching my cut edges. I'll put a wonder clip in there. On this side, I'm going to make sure that these two seams look like that. When I line up my finger there and open it up, those two should match up. And if the sewing gods are with me, they will. Put a wonder clip in. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch, and I'm stitching on this side, not on that side. And I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'll take you to the sewing machine. Okay, I'm going to remove my wonder clip and start stitching. 1/4 inch seam allowance, and my stitch length I have changed to a 2.0. Right off the end, trim my threads, and back to the ironing. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to set my seams or my stitches and just give it a light press there. Take my precision piecing liquid and just run my brush along that stitch line. Open it up, and again it wants to lay towards the bottom section. So I'm just going to take my iron and press it the way it wants to go. Oh, and look at that, the sewing gods were with me. Okay, so now I'm going to flip it over. Give my seam a little bit of liquid. I'm going to open that seam just to eliminate some of the bulk and finger press that area right there. Run my finger along until I come to the white section and just let that seam fold over and let this lay that way. There's no rules saying which way you have to press the seams. I'm pressing to eliminate bulk. When you are pressing your seams, you can either do as I'm doing or do whatever you prefer. I just find that it gives a little less bulk in this area right here. Turn it over, and it's not quite 100% there, but it's close enough for me. Okay, now we have both of our eye sections done. And on page 27, it says to attach to WW. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where, according to the diagram, this one is going to go right here. I'm going to attach my WW section to this side right here, and then I'm going to take my XX section, remove the paper, put that into position, place my next piece down, and our kitty head is coming together quite nicely. So I'm going to attach these two pieces and these two pieces, placing them right sides together. And again, I don't have to worry about this part or this section matching because it's going to be into the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Same thing with this one. I'm going to place it right sides together. And on both sections, I'm going to be stitching on the side that has the most seams. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and we'll stitch that up. Okay, I'm just going to remove my Wonder Clip. Place this under. Now, on this section, we have 2 bulk seams here. So I'm going to hold both my top thread and my bobbin thread, start a little tiny bit off the edge, and I'm going to hold those, and as I start stitching, I'm just going to pull slightly on those 2 threads at the back, and that way it won't be pushing my seams down into the throat plate of my machine. I'm going to make sure my edges are lined up. Just going to use my seam ripper to guide this along so I don't stitch through my fingers. And stitch right off the end. And I'm going to go ahead and do that with the other section, and I'll meet you over at the ironing board. Okay, we're back at the ironing board. I have both my sections stitched together. So now what I'm going to do, like I did before, is I'm just going to set my seams with my iron. And now again, I'm going to let the fabric determine which way the seams are going to go. So I'm just going to flip this up, and they naturally want to go towards the top of the kitty head. they're going to lay flattest by placing them so that the seam allowances are going up towards the top of the kitty head. So I'm just going to flip this back and this one back, and then I'm just going to take, and with my water brush, I'm just going to run that along the seam. And then I'm going to let it just go into the position it wants. And just press from the right side. Flip this one up and press from the right side. Now you will notice I have a little black section here, and that's just because my white section wasn't down far enough, but the 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to hide that. Because there is a little bit of bulk in this section right here, I'm going to flip my pieces over, and at this section right here, I am going to press that seam allowance open, and just like I did on this section, I'm going to open my seam just until it comes to this section right here, and let it just lay folded. Do the same thing on this side. Use a little bit of the seam align precision piecing. Open that seam up, finger press it open, and just press it open until it comes to the edge of the white. Leave this facing up and just let my seams fold at an angle there, just to distribute the bulk. I am going to turn this now, and again, don't worry about that because that 1/4 inch seam allowance is going to cover that up. Now the last thing is we're going to take our SS and TT section, and this is about the only place I found where I needed to make sure that it was really matched. So I'm going to lay that right sides together, line up my cut edges, and on this piece I'm going to do a bit of pinning at that section right there. Everything else is going to be just using a wonder clip. I'll move this out of the way, match up my raw edges. And now for this section right here. If you look from the opposite side, when I flip this over, you can actually feel and see this section right here. Now if I place a pin in there, along where the seam line is, a 1/4 of an inch away, and just open that up, you're going to see it comes fairly close. So when I'm sewing that, I'm going to be sewing from this side here to make sure my seam allowances stay where they're supposed to go because it's less. So I'm going to take this pin and line this up. I can see, I don't know whether you can see that on camera or not, but I can see my black section. It's crisscrossing right there. So I'm going to put my pin in, and I can see my black fabric underneath, and I'm just going to put my pin in, and I'm going to use another pin to secure that in place. and I put this pin in straight up and down, and this one, after I did this one, I put that one in, and it should, I can see where it crosses and makes like a little X, and that's where I should be aiming for to stitch. I'm going to do the same thing with the other section when I get this section stitched together. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine now, and we're going to stitch that up. Okay, we're going to stitch this now. Now there are no other seams that we need to match. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch along that section, holding my threads behind, and I'm just going to stitch along there. I have the bulk of my seams on this side, and I'm just making sure as I stitch along that I'm just keeping that edge guide along the edge of the seam or the edge of the fabric. I'm stitching with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. When I come to the pin where I have determined my X crossing is, where my 2 seams are going to cross, I'm going to stitch right up to that pin. Going to remove the pin. Stitch off the end, and now I'm going to pray that it matches. Let's see how we did. Well, I'd say that's pretty darn close. Okay, meet you at the ironing board. Back at the ironing board, and again I'm going to just take my big iron and just set my seams. And now I'm going to use my water brush again and just run it along that stitching line. And as I did before, I'm going to let the fabric determine which way it wants to go. So I'm just going to flip this over, and I can feel resistance right here, so I know it wants to go the opposite way. So I'm going to lay it down and press it away. Give it a bit of a finger press. I can feel right here at the top of the kitty head there is some bulk there. So I'm just going to take and press with my iron up to that point. Let that seam lay nice and flat in here. And then I'm just going to take and flip this over. And that's all laying nice and flat along this section right here. So the only part that is causing bulk is right here. So if I press that seam open at that point, it's going to lay flat. I'm pressing open above this section here, and I'm going to press open all the way down. And I think I went right to this section right here where this stitching line is. And I'm just going to let the fabric sort of flip itself at that section right there. And my little iron turned off, so I'm going to use my big one. So above this point here, the seam allowance is open, and then I'm just going to let it stay folded that way. Then below this section right here, again, I'm going to press that seam allowance open from the bottom. If I can, come on. Okay. Press that seam allowance below this section here, open, and run my finger along and just let it fall. You'll feel that it will naturally want to fall in place, and this is going this direction and this is open. And it just eliminates some of that bulk. Nothing says you have to press the whole seam allowance open. And if somebody wants to take this apart and see what I did inside, they're welcome to it. Okay, so that section is done. I'm just going to let that cool for just 1 second. If you want to run another bit of the precision piecing liquid along there, go right ahead. Mine feels to be quite flat. And again, any sections that I feel that are a little bit bulky, and there is a little bit of bulk right here, so I'm going to take this, give that a bit of a finger press, and then I'm just going to use my water brush, finger press it open really good. And then press it down again with my little iron here. And now feel that again from the right side, and that feels much better. And there does not appear to be a whole lot of unevenness or anything in this. So now the last section is attaching our right kitty head to our main section. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did with this section, and I'll do that off camera, and I'll be back to show you the finished kitty head. Okay, so I've stitched the other section together, and I'm a little bit off at this section right here. So all I'm going to do is unpick this section right here, realign, and just stitch that section back up. So I took that section out and redid it, and when I realigned everything and stitched it back up, it lines up perfectly. So now again, I'm going to do what I did before and decide which way my seam allowances want to go. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, again, like I did last time, we're going to set our seams, or actually set our stitches, I should say, not seams. Decide which way it wants to go. So above this point right here, I'm going to open the seams, and this wants to lay towards this way, and so I'll turn it over. So above this point here, so this one is pressed open just to this white section. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And press it open just up until the eye point there. This wants to lay that way, so I'm going to let it lay that way and open this up down to this section right here, the same as I did on the other side. Now I'm just going to give it a final press with the steam iron. Turn it over and check to see if I need any more. I can feel any more lumps, and I don't. And there we have it. And I am extremely happy with the way this has turned out. And I'll just take my lint roller, run it over, and our kitty head is complete. And remember, we have 2 of them. So there we go. Okay, so that pretty much sums up our kitty head. The next sections we're going to be doing are the candies, and I'm going to be showing you how to do those. And then our last section is going to be the boo section, and then finishing up. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you found it helpful, please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.